I know that over time that you like to kind of go back to issues and kind of offer that shadowing, and you're building a beautiful structure and a frame, and you're filling in some of the details. You're deepening the activities. It's opportunities in the classroom to go back to content that we've already covered and really provide a little bit more of a deeper discussion on that. We're bringing in activities and interactions and all sorts of good stuff that make this beautifully developed, you know, well-shaded, well-structured, contoured opportunity within the classroom. And if you go ahead, this is probably more like what it felt like for many of us as we went through this past semester. We started off beautiful. We started to build that beautiful structure, the lovely shading and contouring, building things out. And then we were told that we were going remote, and it started to feel a little bit more like this. And I'm seeing some of you smile, a couple of nods, you know, maybe not that beautiful horse that we saw before. But, you know, I'm a social worker, so I love the positive reframe. I like to kind of take what we got, kind of meet people where they are, and think about, okay, well, what's good about this? So we're going to go ahead and ask you to reflect for a second on the accomplishments that we made during this rapid transition. Yeah, it wasn't that first picture. Probably closer to the second, or at least it felt like more like the second. But what have you accomplished in this rapid transition? What are you proud of in this rapid transition? We're gonna get some of your feedback if you enter your information into the Pear Deck.
And so I'll help with that a little bit. If you did log into the Pear Deck, in the lower right corner of your mobile device, you'll see a green box that says answer question. And at this point, you can simply click that box and type in your response.
So we're getting some responses, I hope. I see everybody's working hard on their little device.
Eric, what was the password again, the code for Pear Deck?
EJLSC. It's in the upper right corner of the presentation I'm using.
Thank you.
No problem. No problem. And I'll sneak in my little demonstrations here of Pear Deck just very briefly in between. You'll notice I have 9 of 10 responses for people that are coming in right now. So it'll help you even sort of track that, get an idea of how much activity is going on. Well, 9 of 11, now we've had somebody else join. And then when we're ready, and I can certainly jump into this now, I can click on show responses, and you'll notice that they do come through anonymously.
Terrific. So I'll do a little color commentary here. So learning so much about online teaching, it's becoming more and more comfortable. I love this one. Seeing a student go from a D in March in the seated environment all the way up to a B+ by May. Learning the new technology, getting it to work. We survived it, so did our students. We were able to maintain safety and hopefully health for everybody involved. I'm proud of moving remote learners offline to engage in experiential learning that's a bit more autonomous. So opportunities to kind of flip that classroom, even if we didn't necessarily intend it. Figuring out how to teach labs online, that's remarkable. Another person touting their survival, that they got through their courses. Learning a lot about their freshmen, feeling connected, and some of the students actually found themselves thriving. A lot of survival, which is okay. We'll take it. Maintaining that face-to-face scheduled time meeting, listening and adjusting for student needs. You had more tech skills than you thought. You know, nothing like the heat of battle to learn all your moxie, what you have in you. And staying connected to students seems to be some really good themes in here. Maybe one more. I think that's everybody. All right, so my next question for you is a bit related, but I want to stretch it a little bit further. What were those surprises? What were your positive surprises? Let's keep it in the positive space. Don't worry about that second horse. So what was a positive surprise for you? Something that you might be able to take with you going forward? You hear the birds chirping in the background. Lovely.
And 9 of 11.
Getting some good responses in there.
I will switch view just slightly this time with a grid layout.
Love it.
So just pointing out a couple of features as we go through a few of these.
So surprised about the group connections. You can actually interact in an online setting and learning from those connections. Total participation is much more likely online. When I ask a question, people are responding. There were higher levels of engagement. And certainly this is another tool that Eric is demonstrating today that we could use to support that engagement. Forcing people to be more organized, never a bad thing. Learning new pedagogies and methods to help students engage in their learning. Getting people engaged and turning things in on time. They didn't want to leave our discussions. I think that was true in my courses as well. There were days where I'm like, okay, class is over, we can go now, and they would just hang and hang and hang and interact even further. Positive feedback. Folks that had been silent before in the seated environment are now interacting, coming to light. Flipping a classroom and loving it. Seeing students motivated themselves to learning Zoom, and realize how much they missed lecture. Yeah, all of a sudden when you don't have it, you realize what you had, right? I think for me, I'll just add my perspective on it. This learning environment, I feel like I'm teaching at a different level. I teach at a deeper level because there's an opportunity to really get at what people are looking for in the classroom. All right, so thanks, Eric, for demoing that. I'm going to turn it over to you to get into some more of the meat of the matter.
Sure. So, our next section here, as you can see, remote learning, design and delivery. What we really want to do is take a moment and sort of reflect on what is remote learning, sort of define it, and then try to find where we have some opportunities for growth with what we've already accomplished. As Diane mentioned, we don't want to let anything that we have done, especially that's been positive, go to waste. We want to be able to carry that over to the next course iteration and build off of that. So as you're aware, really remote learning is when the learner and instructor are separated by time and distance and they're not meeting in a traditional classroom. Remote learning, it's probably, since COVID has happened, most people probably think of it as online. In reality, it does not have to be, but that is obviously the modality that we are working with right now. We're using Blackboard and Google Meet and Zoom and all of these different tools. And the big key with remote learning is making sure we provide those learners the opportunity to stay connected not only with faculty, and whether it's your virtual office hours or your synchronous lectures, but also stay connected with each other. And this is where Diane and I will probably sneak in, our soapboxes about quality matters and some of the things that are involved with QM and the idea of building your online presence and maintaining that presence, building an online community as we continue to look at really any sort of remote learning, whether it's hybrid or flipped or fully online. In this last statement, obviously this is very apropos for what we just recently experienced. Opportunities for remote learning are currently linked to emergency situations, things dealing with safety and that of that nature. But something I'll throw in a personal touch in my last few years of teaching, even though there was not an emergency situation, there was no COVID, I used a lot more remote learning with flipping my classroom. And I did find, similar to what Diane said, that my students really got more out of the class because they didn't have to hang on. For example, if I was showing a video clip to understand some historical documentary, I didn't actually have to show that in class and use that time. They could view it on their own through the LMS we were using. And then we could come back to class in that very flipped, strategy and really dive into a discussion about it. very targeted, using whatever methods you would use, and really go deeper into the information. So when we think about course design in the remote learning context, you do obviously have a design cycle, right? We all are aware that we have our course learning outcomes based on, ultimately what we want our students to get out of that course. And then how do we put it all together? So the forethought and planning that a faculty member puts into the course not only includes the content itself, but also what about the navigation? How are students going to go from one item to the next to the next? How is the course organized? Is it coherent in its presentation? And of course, alignment. Alignment is something I know Diane is very passionate about. We're going to probably continually bring that up throughout the rest of this presentation. But keeping this in mind, this reflection, and you notice in this diagram, is something that is constant in the course design cycle. We've just come through a rushed version of, we took our learning outcomes, we created our assessments and learning activities that were thrust online. We did our best to align it to what we had with our syllabus. And we, now we're in that stage really in this presentation and at the end of the semester where we're analyzing that action and saying, where can we improve? How can we make this sustainable? How can we take it further? Diane and I did attend a webinar about a week or so ago, and a couple of statements about course design that really stood out to us that we wanted to share with everybody. First, let me make this a little bigger. I see some people, struggling to see things. I apologize. First, focusing on alignment is really the best first step. Everything in your course design should circle back to or connect back to those course objectives. So your assessments, your learning activities, your learning interactions, and your technology. But don't let the technology drive your decision making. Your technology should support you and your students. Try not to, and sometimes it can happen, we become pigeonholed. I really want to use Padlet. Don't let the technology drive that decision making. There are other ways to still handle, what you need to handle in your activities. Also, online design does need to be flexible. It should be flexible because of the things that pop up. And back to the horse that Diane was showing in the first slide there, that really high contrast, just beautifully drawn, artistic stallion of a horse. Well, I'm no artist, but I can tell you, I don't believe somebody put that together in only a few minutes, right? There was dedication to the design of that horse. We did not have that luxury with the rapid transition of a tremendous amount of time. We had some of that, but we certainly didn't have, really an industry estimate in instructional design and in e-learning in general, that it typically takes approximately 100 to 200 hours to design a high quality course. High quality. We can do less than that, but what kind of quality you're gonna get, well, I guess that's debatable. A lot of what we're talking about in course design comes from the backward design model, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Again, starting with those course objectives, right? Those desired results, determining what's the acceptable evidence that demonstrates students have met those course objectives. The more authentic, by the way, the better. And planning those learning experiences, which if we now kind of go back the other way, right? If we determine the results, the evidence, and plan the learning experiences and instruction, really there'd be a fourth. Now, what tools support those learning experiences? That's just not part of this diagram. Well, they're all going to be connected, and we could work it backwards. The Zoom supports my lecture, which supports maybe we're having a discussion following the lecture as the acceptable evidence, which now, whatever your course objective that's related to discussion would be, as an example. So now, once we put it all together, right, we've designed it, we have our plan laid out, and we're going to share some tools with everyone today as well, by the way. Once we have everything all laid out. The actual teaching of the course is the delivery. We've got our course design and our course delivery. It utilizes active learning strategies. A lot of times in a rapid transition, I certainly wouldn't fault anyone for using some more passive learning strategies. We were thrust into an unwinnable situation, is the way I see it. Those passive learning strategies that are very, very much dominated where students aren't necessarily engaged. What we want to try to work into our online courses is maybe take some of those things that you've learned and you put together in this rapid transition, and how can we turn them or manipulate them into active learning. Technology can help with that. This Pear Deck that's put together here is just a small example of how we're trying to get our audience right now to be engaged in our discussion a little bit, contribute to the discussion. That's our leveraging the appropriate tools. Authentic assessments. In instructional design, and I know there are more disciplines than mine that would use this, but case studies are great. Having students develop their own case studies. Probably one of the best assignments I ever had to do in grad school was a case study of where I was working. So really analyzing a needs assessment, all those things of the school I was working at, and then write up that case study. It wasn't just read a case study and regurgitate information. It was an authentic experience. And I could establish that connection between my own life and the content. And so it was that was part of that delivery that instructor had put together for our cohort in that. Those of you that are familiar with QM, you'll know that the interactions, learner to learner, easy way to see this is usually a discussion, although there are others. Learner to content, right? So you're the learner digesting whatever content that they need to digest, your video lessons, the readings, whatever. And of course, those learner to instructor interactions, those are really key, building your presence and letting those students know that even though you're separated by distance, you're not separated by a human connection. Consider assessments, as we already mentioned, not only that are authentic, but are self-directed activities, things in which they're taking ownership of it. It's a little bit easier in a face-to-face course to maybe let that fall by the wayside, but we cannot let that fall by the wayside in an online. That self-direction, that ownership really needs to be there. And then, of course, establishing your teacher presence, a social presence, cognitive presence, and building a sense of community overall.
If I can jump in there,
Absolutely.
I really want to underscore the importance of that latter item and reflecting on what people were saying in response to the Pear Deck. Like that seemed to be the critical component. Like they wanted to linger, they wanted to see you. And, this is true in any kind of online environment. I remember I was traveling and I was running an online course and I had to do some videos and I didn't have myself on the video. They couldn't see me. And the number of complaints I got from students that week, they just want to see me. They want to see me moving my hands. They want to see my animation. They want to feel my energy. And so I really encourage those of you who have those lectures to make sure that they can see you on it, that they can feel your personality, that you come through those computer cables and over the internet, but you're sparking that curiosity. There's that cognitive presence, the opportunities to interact. They're feeling each other, they're feeling you, but it also builds a sense of community. Being remote can be really isolating. And if we are not intentional about building connections between you, the learner to the instructor, the learners to each other, it can make it a very isolating experience. So definitely food for thought on that one.
And great segue, actually, Diane. You want to talk about some more of your personal experiences in leveraging what you've built?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, that backward course design that you were just referencing, it's the ball game for me now in the way that I teach. It forces me to really take out all the noise, really focus in on what matters. What do I want the student to walk out of my classroom with? And that could be knowledge, it could be skills, it could be abilities. From there, I'm able to ask my Whitney Houston question, you know, how will I know? How will I know that they actually got this information? And I can do that through formative assessments like the case studies that you're talking about. We do a lot of projects that are parts that they're getting feedback on along the way, and then they do a final case or a final report as their summative evaluation. I think that's been really valuable to me. I also think about, okay, what do I need to provide? What are the different tools and techniques that I can use? What are the different, you know, is it an online quiz? Is it a discussion board? What is it that I can bring to the table to facilitate that learning and to also assess whether or not students are getting it, to help me to restructure my learning or my offerings and really build that out. So we want you to take a minute and really reflect on this. And what you're doing in your own teaching. So if you go ahead, you know, we have gone through a fairly rapid transition. You know, we're going from the beautiful horse to kind of the not so beautiful horse. And so what were some of the things that going remote forced you to do that you now think you can continue to use in your courses going forward? And what kind of tweaks, what could you use, what could you kind of change in your course to actually get it to a level where it's a much more defined, it's a more refined course that would maybe meet QM standards. So we're going to go to a new Pear Deck. So thinking about some of your triumphs, thinking about some of the things you did, whether it was building discussion or being able to provide content in the remote environment, doing synchronous and asynchronous teaching, building assessments right into your course. If you could speak about those triumphs and identify where you might be able to reuse this content. So we've highlighted face-to-face, whether that we're back in the seated environment, a hybrid, which would be some remote and some seated engagements, and then fully online. What are some of the things that you think you might be able to reuse in one or any of these modalities?
And while you're working on this, you'll notice that you do this slide. We're just demonstrating a few other tools. There is an option for text, and you can put it right on your one of these circles or all of these circles, wherever you're going to put it. But then you can also draw and things of that nature. So that should be on whichever device you're using for your Pear Deck at this time. Looks like we have 7 of 11 responses. Okay, we'll jump into a few of these and others may show up. And again, I'll do a grid layout this time. Oh, no, too small. So we'll do the list layout and sort of go through them. So let's see, recalling your triumphs. One person said online Zoom. I'm guessing that means they're ready and they highlighted it the best they could. I'm guessing that means really looking forward to continue to reuse Zoom or maybe become a little bit more proficient with it. Inviting learners to, and okay, you know, this is a good, I guess, tool for me to know how this pushed it off the page a little, because it looks like inviting learners to poo. I'm sure that's not what you meant. So, but I imagine whoever put this, it's the idea of inviting learners to, you know, participate.
It was me.
Be involved. Could you let us know what you said there, Angela?
Yeah, what I'm noticing is that because I'm online facilitating learning, I'm asking learners to share their thinking on digital tools instead of sharing it out verbally. And so more people are participating and contributing. And that's something I want to keep maybe when I go face-to-face.
Great. Let's see. videos for explaining LMS and other programs, use of use of more Google elements and things to continue to reuse, Zoom, Google, YouTube. I think this is great. I know personally, I'm a fan. I like to narrow my teaching tools down to about 3 or 4. I don't like to have more than that in a course. I'm a believer in keeping it simple and honing those skills, not only for me, but for my students as well. Too many tools can create chaos.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly. Refining the syllabus. I don't know if anybody attended our building the online syllabus sessions yesterday, but there's a lot more to an online syllabus than maybe your typical face-to-face. And a lot of it, as Diane mentioned, is because of that physical disconnect from students. They need more upfront information to be successful in the course. But flipping, I imagine this means flip strategies, flipping things online, stuff that maybe you used to do traditionally in a face-to-face, in a session, you can sort of flip the dynamic. Deleted response, okay. More online discussion. I'm certainly a fan of that. I think it can be very powerful if designed correctly. There are some discussions that need some work probably. Online quiz on reading, video components. So some of your triumphs that you might reuse, I think this is great. Out of curiosity, has anybody used in our meeting the Blackboard quiz bank generator? A couple of you, I see some thumbs up. I see a few head nods. Awesome. We hope to refine that even more as we go through this as an IT department and make it a little bit better, but it certainly can help you build those things.
I wanted to say I loved it. I have to say, because I had done Blackboard quizzes before, and I had tried to upload things, and that worked in 30 seconds. Whoever created that, I love you. So I needed to say that. I didn't know who it was.
Well, I will pass that along to the web development team. I was familiar with that same sort of generator from the College of Southern Idaho, and they had an open source code. So our web development team was able to get their hands on it, and they took what the College of Southern Idaho had, and they really beefed it up. They did an amazing job. So I will pass along your appreciation. Thank you. And then let's see, students responding to a video explanation of an activity they've done, that they have figured out their mistakes. I think that's great. That's very flipped. That's powerful right there.
And it's also community building right there.
Mm-hmm.
They get to hear from you.
I might continue with flipped classroom since I had better discussions. I think that's a great point to go off on, as well as maybe in a follow-up to this slide, if we had another one, we might ask, like, did you experience things that maybe didn't go so well in a traditional face-to-face, all of a sudden were better? And I think that's a triumph. That's an accomplishment that should be celebrated as well. To take these items that you've just sort of outlined for yourself and making them sustainable, it can be a little bit complicated of a diagram, but really sort of asking yourself these self-reflective questions about some of these strategies, right? In this case, does your course have required meetings? If the answer is yes, then obviously you're going to want to look at, all right, how can we continue to meet online? Are you going to use Zoom? If it has to be Zoom, what do you need to do to get that Zoom Pro account if you need more than 40 minutes for a class of 25? Can you do this via Google Meet and so on? And then again, just what's that modality got to look like? No, doesn't have to have required meetings. Then you're probably looking at synchronous options being few and far between, or maybe eliminated altogether in the course, depending on the content, I would say. And again, what are we doing in Blackboard to set this up? One of the interesting things, just from the ID perspective, that somebody had mentioned the idea of videos and discussions. I had worked with a faculty member. I really want my students to watch this video, and then I want them to comment about it, but I want them to see everybody else's comments. With Blackboard, especially with Ultra, it's so easy to embed that YouTube video right into a discussion, So it's all right there in one place. And it helps the flow in that community we're talking about, of that discussion. I can see the video, I can see my comment, and then the other students comment that the professor has chimed in, and so on and so forth. So really leveraging those tools and being self-reflective on how you can, refine them is a huge part of this. That being said, we did mention how we wanted to make sure we tied this into QM, so I'm going to turn it back over to Diane.
Yeah, so QM honestly was brand new to me just a couple of years ago. We now have a fully online MSW Program Master Social Work program, and I've really become a big fan of it. And it can feel overwhelming when you're looking at it at first. It is designed to support you as you're developing fully online courses or courses that have a pretty significant online component, like a hybrid where you're doing a fair bit of your work in that online space. I have to say, for me, the tool is just really about good, solid course construction. And I was lamenting to Eric, like, I don't know about any of you, but in my professional program, I never learned how to teach. Like, I never took a class on pedagogy. I never took a class on any of that. And so a lot of it was more instinctive. This is what helped me as a learner. This is the way I'll build my course. And for me, diving into the QM Matters, the higher ed rubric, was just really affirming and helping me to think about good, solid course construction. So the rubric itself has 8 components to it. It's got the course overview and the introduction. What is the course about? It's forcing you to then think about, okay, well, what are the specific learning objectives or the competencies we want people to secure from the course, whether that's knowledge or behavior, if it's skills that we want them to be able to display. And then again, thinking around all of the different curves on how I'm going to assess that. Am I going to do some formative assessment to see if they're kind of coming along with me, or am I going to do some more summative assessment at the end of the course? What can they bring to bear on it? And so the rubric is really designed to think about that alignment piece and how every one of these components can build to support that. So you're thinking about your assessment, you're thinking about measurement of those learning objectives, which are framed within the course overview. You're thinking about what materials do I need to deliver, what instructional content do I need to deliver in order to get them there, what kind of activities and what kind of interactions I'm going to have my learners engaged in. And again, it's learner to learner, it's learner to the material, it's learner to the instructor, and how am I going to layer those components in. Going back to Eric's point, what technology am I going to use to support this? And you don't want to throw in everything in the kitchen sink. You want to be really smart and thoughtful about, okay, this is really the best tool to support that learning outcome, to assess that content, and building it backwards. The 2 things that are probably the most different from your typical course construction, that they really make it more online, is the learner support component and the accessibility and usability standards within it. And for me, this is really, really helpful because I'm not an expert in accessibility. I feel like I'm learning a lot about it, but I'm no expert in it. I'm no expert in all of the different technologies used to support that. And so the QM Matters rubric really frames some of that out. I also want to give a shout out. Eric mentioned it before. Martha did, and Eric yesterday did a wonderful overview of the online syllabus and what you've got to build in around that. The QM rubric supports that, but you definitely want to check out some of the tools that they talked about just yesterday in that session. It was great. So the 2 things that are the most different are accessibility and usability and learner support. And we could do whole sessions on that. But really, for me, the QM rubric is just affirming what I have instinctively known about teaching that I've never necessarily been taught, about how do you make sure that everything you're doing is leading to that learner's opportunity to engage the material. And it also helps me to just push out the unnecessary. because in the remote space or in the online space, if you're doing this as kind of an emergency, or if you're doing it just to kind of facilitate more learning, you don't need the extraneous. You want to really titrate down to what's going to help that student to get what you're trying to get across to them. So I think that's really, you know, probably the most helpful component of QM from my perspective.
And to build off of that in our next slide here, as Diane mentioned, these are your 8 general standards of the QM rubric. And what's really great about the QM rubric is it actually goes pretty much right in order, for the most part, to backward design, right? You would start with a course overview. What's the overall idea that's taking place in the course? Then you develop your learning outcomes, your competencies, then your assessments, and so on and so forth. Obviously, just in order. You'll actually see that in this very basic diagram. If you do have departmental outcomes, you know, we can obviously bring those in, but going right to the course level outcomes, you know, we're talking about those big objectives. They need to be measurable and observable. Of course, we know that's also an EPC requirement. So we're not only talking QM here, we're talking things that obviously are Daemen specific as well. But then getting a little bit more granular. If that overall big course objective can be broken down into, let's say, 3 sub-objectives, right? Or module level objectives. In QM, I'll just point this out. This would be, not that you need to memorize this, but the course level objectives would be what we call an essential standard in QM, standard 2.1. The module level objectives would be essential standard 2.2. If these are missing from your online course in a QM review, the review stops at that point until these 2 items, or one of the 2, gets rectified. And they have to be observable and they have to be measurable. Then part of QM is 3.1, another essential standard, that assessment and evidence, right? What formative and summative assessments exist that demonstrate, that students are attaining those module level objectives, which obviously feed back up to those course level objectives. And then finally, I've sort of, I guess, combined what in QM would be standards 4.1, 5.1, and 6.1. What are the activities, the interactions, and the technology supporting these things involved for students to get prepared for those assessments, whatever they may be. So next steps. Again, we didn't want you to leave this presentation without having some tangible things to be able to work with, you know, beyond the presentation itself. So I'm actually going to leave the presentation for just a moment, and I'm not going to click on every single one of these hyperlinks, but you will have access to these items. A few things I would like to point out. We did put together, and I believe it is this, I believe it's actually this very first one, this faculty user guide. We did put together sort of a cheat sheet on backward design. As Diane mentioned, I could probably give a week-long seminar, or, you know, just on backward design. I've been aware of it as an educator for almost 20 years, and there's still things I'm learning about backward design. I don't know that it's anything anybody can ever get a black belt in, so to speak. It can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. So anyways, in this little cheat sheet, we've given some hints on, hey, step 1, what are those course level objectives, those big ideas? And most of us probably base them on the cognitive aspect of Bloom's, but of course there are the psychomotor and the affective domains as well. What about those module level objectives, right? We're looking at those 3 sub-objectives of one big course objective. I know this is a little difficult to see on the screen, so give me a moment. Make this just a little bigger. Okay. But obviously going from our lower level of Bloom's, our remembering, all the way up to our highest level, higher order thinking skills. I think everybody might have a slightly different take on this, but I've always thought of it like this. If my module objectives focus on the higher level Bloom's, well, you probably had to have met these. You probably had to already been able to identify, you know, something or define something in order to now actually assess it. So I tend to write my objectives toward the higher end of Bloom's, my module level, because if you can do this, yeah, you're most likely can remember and understand and apply. Another part of this cheat sheet, looking at those summative assessments. And we did try to put some diagrams in here just sort of to make this a little more visually, not just appealing, but draw out how they work together, right? That authentic performance or case study or whatever, these large projects, research assignments, our formative assessment cycle, right? Obviously it's a continuing cycle, but the evidence shows that students have demonstrated the desired results. Step 5, okay, the instructional materials. I won't dive too much into this. Your PowerPoints, your textbooks, your things of that nature. And then of course, the learning activities and interactions. What are they doing to engage, to build that community we talked about earlier, to engage with you, to engage with the material, and so on. In the technology, for most of us, this is going to include obviously Blackboard, but what are some of the other things? Today we're demonstrating Pear Deck, but maybe just the G Suite in general is part of, you know, really what you're going to leverage. In a more formal way in our presentation, another one of these hyperlinks, I love this poster. This actually is from New Mexico State, which this was taken from a webinar I attended with QM. And it really basically says, like, here you go. Here's your backward design map, right? Here's your module level objectives, and you can see the COs that are aligned from the course level objectives for the course itself. What are the learning materials in order to meet these module objectives? What are the activities in order to meet these module objectives? The assessments in order to meet these module and course objectives. This is one of my very nerdy favorite posters. And again, with this poster, they've really gone ahead and sort of given you more information around what it means to have your module objectives, what it means to be measurable and observable. The final item I'll point out very briefly is, again, something we've taken, we've modified. We do have tools to help you if you did want to implement this type of design, and I highly recommend it. This really is a QM course alignment tool. And I'm gonna, again, just use an example time frame. If your course is designed with 15 modules, you would complete one of these documents for each module. If it only is 10 modules, you do 10 documents for each module. So obviously you get the idea. But you'll notice what we did was we pointed out where this would align to the QM rubric. This SRS means Specific Review Standard 2.1, 2.2 and 2.5 here, 3.1. I bring this up for 2 reasons. Not only so you can use it yourself, and we've given hints on what it means to fill out the information in here, but if this was in your course as a QM reviewer, if I saw this in your course, this would help us really know what your vision is for your course. And it doesn't have to be anything shared with the students. You could just have it as a, you know, in a folder at the bottom saying instructor resources. It would allow us to know your vision. Another, in my opinion, great bonus of this is if you are the lead instructor on a course, this can be shared with all those adjuncts, all those other people that are now going to be using that course. And so now you have alignment across instructors, not just in the course, but alignment across instructors. Everybody's on the same page. They can see, all right, here are the objectives, here are the kind of evidence we're looking for, the materials, the learning activities, and of course the technology that's being used. So just another, I guess, takeaway I want you to be able to have at the end of this presentation today. So that being said, we're actually going to turn it over to the crowd, and we went through quite a few things. Are there any lingering questions? I know we are running short on time and that people have important things to do. Okay. Well, if anything pops up, no problem. This, I want to at least make you aware of this. This is a whole nother topic, but Diane had alluded to this when she spoke about accessibility and usability and things of that nature as part of the QM rubric. And as we do more online, some things we have to be aware of are definitely things like the students' technology and skills, what they have access to. I'm on my own personal soapbox of the idea of equity with technology. So that's something to be aware of, I guess. Accessibility is another aspect of this. We mentioned it several times in the syllabus presentation yesterday about the use of heading styles and which fonts are more accessible and things of that nature. Unfortunately, we don't have time to dive into that today. Student privacy and other things. I'll give another just self shout out for our office. A lot of this has been built into our master course template to take care of for you, so you don't have to hunt down how can students protect their data and their privacy, where is the accessibility office, that kind of stuff. So, please check it out. Even if you hide a bunch of items, at least check it out. And then for the sake of time, I'm not going to touch on export packages right now. We did that in another presentation, but I will stay on the line if anybody wants me to circle back to that question. Outside of that, there's some resources in this, and Peter and I and Angela Stockman, who's a new member of our office, we're always available. If you email id@daemen.edu, it will go to the three of us. This hyperlink goes directly to Peter's appointment schedule. This hyperlink directly goes to my appointment schedule if you did want to set up an appointment for anything. We're always available, meet via Zoom or whatever. Outside of that, before we run out of time, I want to just again say thank you, Diane. I really appreciate your time and your expertise with this. And I will now shut up and turn it over to Diane.
I just want to thank everybody for hanging out. And I just want to underscore, you did a lot of work, right? You went through a heck of a time, and I realize it wasn't perfect. And I know that's anxiety producing for many of us because we want the highest quality in our classroom. But I really do think there's an opportunity here to take the moment necessary to kind of use what you've learned and bring it forward. Take it forward in your classes and really leverage all those efforts and energies. It was hard, but we did it and we learned some things from it, and our students, we survived it, we all said. And I think in many respects, like the number of students who said how happy and glad they were for the opportunity to continue their education, to continue to move forward in their development, I think that tells us the importance of taking it forward. So thanks everybody for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your hard work this semester and going forward.
Eric, I wanted to mention we use UBD in in my 203 and 237 and in all my literacy.
Oh,
so
that's great.
Yeah, our students wouldn't have an issue with having this in the template and having it in the syllabus, because then they can see the alignment with our course
Right.
as we're teaching it along the way.
Yeah, I would imagine in any education courses, as an educator, why would you want to hide this?
Exactly.
To people you're teaching how to become educators.
Correct. So I think that this is a great opportunity for like the whole department. They don't all use it, but I think the whole department needs to get on board with embedding it.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. And
trying to use the template. So I really appreciate it, both of you, hitting it hard with the backward design, because I think that's critical for the thinking.
Karen, I want to take a class in your department.
Please.
I do. I can't tell you how much
Well, everything you did with Bloom's, that's what I do in 203, and I align Bloom, Vygotsky, and a multiple intelligence along with UBD, and I show them how, and so then it's kind of a natural for me, and the kids laugh because they've had me for every education course, and now they're in my 3 literacy courses, so it's great for me because it's this common denominator that I'm not asking, do you know this information? I know you already had it. It's going back. I think that's my hardest part. And I was thinking through yesterday when I did the syllabus, when students, like I give them front load all this material in 203, and I keep referring back to it for all my other classes. Some of them are saying, oh, we didn't save it, we don't know where it is. And I'm uploading more because I give them, they give their flip charts with blooms with their questions that they should be, you know, then applying later on in their lesson plans with me. So I've got to find an easier way, like in Blackboard, like a hub library or something.
Well, can you copy stuff over?
I do. And then